I can see you. All right, man. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, yep, excellent, Matt. So I got to be honest, this is a bit of a silly debate, obviously, changing the month of February to 30 days, but I actually think that there are some good reasons to do it. So I guess the first thing I'll do is I'll explain largely why, what I think the parameters of the debate are. The way I would do this is to take a lot of the 1 days, a couple of the 1 days off some of the 31 day months and give them to February, such that we had, just a flat 30 days across everywhere. And to account for the whole leap year thing, the leap year would just be the difference between 30 and 31 days rather than 28 and 29. And that way, basically, all months would be either 30 or 31 days. I don't really care which ones get stolen from. It's pretty irrelevant to me. The other thing to note as well is that I think this debate presumes a certain amount of cooperation with date setting. So I'm just going to assume that, the world got together and had like a vote or something, and we're like 30 days, yeah, well, let's go for it. And I'd also like to point out as well that given the vast technological improvement of the modern years, that with many dates no longer being on physical calendars, but actually being on digital phones, which are often connected to the cloud, this would actually be surprisingly easy to implement because all of this, the major web providers and everything would just change it, and all of the technology would just update for you. And I reckon that would be very positive. For people whose birthdays was on 28 to 29, they get to be just the cool hipsters who had the birthday that will never be again. I reckon that's pretty swish for them. And also, I think the other thing that worth mentioning is that I think this is unlikely to cause any sort of vast technological panic. I'd point to like instances of Y2K where people for some reason felt that, if you change something in the computer, everything's going to just go to shit. Obviously, that doesn't actually happen. So why do I think we should do this? The main reason I think we should do this actually, and it sounds kind of lame, but I think it actually affects people in real ways, is just the way with signing contracts and getting yourself into phone deals or subscription plans or anything on like monthly, anything like that. And for a lot of people, this is like their income as well. It actually really matters that sometimes the months are shorter, because for a person, like getting a month plan, where that month is worth 3 days less arbitrarily, it really sucks, right? And so if everything was more even, I think that would just be much easier for those people and could actually save them a lot of money and stop companies, for example, for setting up X month deals where what you thought was a saving is gone because it's 3 days less, which is 10% of a month, is pretty relevant. I suppose another thing to mention as well is when it'd be much easier to teach people. Because obviously when you're in school, the rhyme is pretty good, the whole 30 days, September, April, June, and November. But then at the end, it just gets nuts, right? All the rest have 21, except for February, just 28 and 29. We could have a rhyme, which works, right? Which kids could learn without the most learning disadvantaged kid getting confused at the end. So I'll pass it.
Okay, so I'm going to accentuate the fact that there is a reason why the month of February is 28 days long and 29 on a leap year. The calendrical reform of Pope Gregory XIII resulted in the modern Gregorian calendar, which served its purpose beautifully since the year 1582 when it was instituted. The reason why this reform was necessary is that the actual length of a solar year, or a complete revolution of the Earth around the sun, is roughly 365 and a quarter days. Now, it's not exactly 365 and a quarter, and that's going to be important to consider as you look at the pro and the con in this round. For much of human history, there was no correlation between the calendar and the solar year. The solar year is much more difficult to observe. A lot of people were tempted to use the moon, such as the Babylonians, and so they had to develop a system, and I'm quoting from Daniel Borstein, the historian. In a search for a way to measure the cycle of the seasons in multiples of moon cycles, they found that if they used a 19-year cycle, assigned to 7 of the years 13 months, and assigned to the other 12 years only 12 months, they could continue to use the conveniently visible phases of the moon as the base of their calendar. But this is obviously really crazy. This Metonic calendar, Borstein says, with its 19-year clusters was too complicated for everyday use. So obviously what we're looking for is practicality here. Now, my opponent has brought up the fact that we should have, that the month of February shouldn't be different from all the other months. We can take or leave from other months. I'm actually willing to concede this point, that we can reshuffle the days of the year in order to better organize the months of the year. But I think that there are a number of ways that we could do that better. For instance, the exact solar revolution of the Earth is 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds, and a number of milliseconds and nanoseconds. We could simply add the irregular period of time that extra several minutes to the time between December 31st and January 1st. That would eliminate these leap years, and we wouldn't have to revise our calendar ever again. We wouldn't have to do this weird 28 days one year, 29 days the other year. If you like things a little bit more neat and orderly, we could keep the leap days and years and simply normalize the months of the year to 28 days each with 13 months per year for a total of 365 days, then add and subtract days as necessary, much like the Gregorian reform. This would have multiple benefits, including but not limited to the fact that 7-day weeks divide evenly into 28-day months, which means that at that point, the week calendar and the month calendar would be in sync with each other, and we wouldn't have this crazy stuff with, well, what day of the week it is, how many weeks have I done this, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the point here is that there are better options than making February just 30 days long. You could just vote on the basis of this alone. You could also vote on the basis of the fact that there really is no better solution than evening out the months rather than just taking and picking and choosing a couple days out of 31 or 30-day months.
Right. So your strategy, you agree that there's a problem at the moment, but your strategy is that you have a solution. I guess, like, pointing to my initial problems with ambiguity around contracts and ease of teaching kids and stuff, it seems your solutions don't really solve that. So if your new thing is to shorten all the months to 28 days and then like add days as necessary, I'm not even quite sure what that even means. Does that mean that we're getting like a new month, which is like, you know, like 10 days or something, or does it mean that the months change from 28? Well, you're going to have to explain that a bit better, because at the moment the impression I've been given is that there are a whole lot of unaccounted for days, and the words you said was add and subtract as necessary. We're going to have to hear what that means in detail. The other possible solution you gave was that actually you could just tack on the extra 5 hours at the end. I think you might run into a bit of a problem here. That means you're going to have one day only, which is 29 hours long, right? Which would then bump every other day for that year 5 hours out of sync, which means that every year midday changes by 5 hours, right? So the alarms which people had to wake them up at 7, now they're going to have to change them to 2. Then they're going to have to go through that random AM, PM nonsense. I think that's insane. Right? Everyone would have to be educated as to their schedule every year. So I'm going to say that's a bad option. We should rather just stick with leap years. I'd also note that you didn't really respond to any of my substandard point. That's all right, because you had a lot of setup time. The other thing I will note is that when you were talking about the length of the solar year, one of the advantages of my policy is that that doesn't actually change, because I'm not adding days total. I'm just reallocating them. So to account for the length of the solar year under my policy, you just have to keep up with the existing policies of leap years, and you know, because they're taking from 31 days and giving to February, that remains unchanged. Anyway, I think that's all I've had to say, so I'll pass back to you.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you brought up the point. You know, I really like your debating style, so I'm glad we're having this debate together, man. I really think that the question that you asked about the adding or, you know, subtracting days, I wasn't entirely precise about that, because there's a whole history behind the way that the calendar is developed, and the fact that the Roman calendar originally, they just basically had a gap in space between the end of December until March. The year started in March and ended in December. And it wasn't until later that they even had the months of January and February. So literally at the time, you could say, what month is it? And the answer would be, there is no month. You know, it's the middle of winter. Who cares? It's all tied to the agriculture and stuff like that. The whole point of the calendar is to give people a shared basis upon which to make plans. That's the whole point that my opponent is making when he talks about how we should be able to better teach people the way that the calendar works, teach children the way that the calendar works. Now, one unique benefit of the proposal that I've offered for your consideration, the 28-day months, 13 months of 28 days, adding to 364 days, which of course is not the complete solar year. The advantage of that is that the months divide evenly into weeks, and there's no reason that we couldn't just make that extra day a holiday. Also, you're assuming that because I make that one day 29 hours or whatever, that's going to screw with people's sleep cycle or something like that. I don't actually know if you guys have daylight saving in Australia, but it's messed up. Yeah, it's a terrible thing. And, I wish we could debate that. Why do we have that? But honestly, I think that the issue here is that the actual length of the solar year is 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, et cetera, and our current calendar doesn't even account for that. So if you go for my proposal right now and you tack on the extra stuff at the end, that means we get an extra day that isn't within any month, 364 days divided into 13 months of 28 days apiece that are all evenly divided into weeks, and then we just have a holiday on the last day. And it can be 29 hours, or you can divide it however you want to, but the point is that it's not that crazy to do this because people have been doing this for a long time. That's what the Egyptians were doing, that's what the Babylonians were doing. The civil years of all of these societies usually didn't add up to exactly 365 and a quarter days. The way to make it easier and more accessible is to make it evenly divisible and all of the months the exact same length. And I don't see why your plan would capture that any better, because I think that making them all an even length would be easier to teach people, and also would mean that none of the months are different lengths of days, so the amount of pay that you talked about would be exactly the same for every single month that you work during the year. None of the weird stuff there. And I'll pass it back now. I think. I don't know. I guess I won't. Here you go.
All right, yeah, so this is fun. Okay, so I guess in some senses you've almost got two different ideas. The first idea was just to extend just the last day by the 5 hours, and the second idea is the 28-day regulation. So I'll rebut both. I suppose the first one is to just extend the last year by 5 hours. The problem I see here isn't actually with that day in particular. It's the effect it has on each subsequent day. So, for example, if you could imagine the regular person wakes up at about like 8 o'clock or something and goes to bed at 9, or goes to bed at maybe 10. That extra day means that there's not just like a 12 p.m. Then there's or a.m. There's then a 13 and a 14 and a 15 and 16, and then when you get to 1 again, right? Then 1 a.m. the next day isn't 1 a.m. in the middle of the night. Then 1 a.m. is early morning. That's like what most people would think of as 6, right? And the problem then is that you don't get your extra 5 hours until the end of the year again. So that means that every single year, what time of day it is changes meaning completely, because in 1 year, 6 a.m. is the morning. The next year, 6 a.m. is midday, and the year after that, 6 a.m. is the afternoon. And I think if what we're going for is, ease and everything like that, you're suggesting that weeks would make things easier for people. I think that in itself is the most hard thing we could possibly have imagined. That idea seems catastrophic. So with that, I'll move on to your second idea, which I believe is better, which is the 28 the regulation. The first thing I point out is that having exactly 4 weeks in a month might yield some benefit, yes, but I don't necessarily think that it yields that much benefit, because, for example, the way I explained it was that when you have length of contracts and when you use month as a measurement tool, it doesn't necessarily matter how many weeks are in them, as long as they're all the same. So having an X month lock-in contract or whatever, or working for X months, the relevant part is that the months are all the same. I agree that yours is slightly better in that you get rid of that 1 day discrepancy. But what I'm suggesting is that 1 day discrepancy will be much less. There'll only be a couple of 31 days because we've reallocated a couple of them to February. The other thing to point out, though, is that this isn't clear what you're going to do with all the spare days, because you're saying we could have a holiday, but if you reduce each month to 28 days, that's not one holiday. That's like about 20 days of holidays, because like you've got 11 months, which you've taken. Oh, you can explain it better, but the impression you've given so far is that all of the 31-day months you've reduced by 3, and all of the 28-day months you've reduced by 2, which means that you've actually got like something like 20 days to account for. You can't have a 20-day holiday. So you're shaking your head, which indicates that this plan needs further explanation. So I'll pass it to you to clarify.
I'll make this real clear. I'm sorry, I thought I said this before. 13 months of 28 days apiece equals 364 days. And so I'm talking about, the fact that would be not the 12 months of the year. We'd have 13 months now. But that leaves it with only 1 day plus all that extra time in there, whatever. One thing that I think you might not have considered with this is that if you add any days to February, even if you take them off of the other months, we need some sort of rule for where we're going to add and remove them in order to keep the leap year constant. I'm not really clear on how we would do that. And I'll let you explain that. I might have just missed something about that. The other thing, I know that this is a silly debate. I don't have any really strong feelings about it or anything, but I do think that it's interesting to consider that there's multiple ways to do this, and there's all sorts of ways that the calendar is messed up. And I think that there's better ways to solve the problem than just, lengthening the month of February. That's why I proposed, just for consideration, the idea that you could make all the months the same length. And then you divide the week into those months, and all that stuff. I don't necessarily think that, I'm going to go to my grave swearing that that's the way the calendar should be implemented. I do want to address real quickly the issue of we're talking about the 29-hour day or whatever and the effects they would have on each subsequent day and so on and so forth. But the whole reason the Gregorian calendar with its leap years and the leap years that don't happen on the years that are multiples of hundreds, except when it's a multiple of 400 or whatever, then the reason that this works is because it's a good division and it keeps the solar year in time with the calendar. Otherwise, you're going to get drift. That's why we need to fix the calendar to account for the extra 11 minutes or whatever that the current calendar with its leap days doesn't account for, because we're going to slowly get drift and the seasons are going to move backwards through the calendar. That's exactly what happened with all these old calendars. So that's why I'm advocating perhaps you could consider making the actual calendrical year tied exactly to the solar year. And there's multiple ways that you could do this, but the way to do it is not by making the month of February 30 days long. And now I figured out how to pass the mic, so.
So the first thing I'll point out is your last point about seasonal drift, which is absolutely correct, and which is one of the reasons I would maintain the leap year. But I guess the question is for your first idea about just having, it being exactly in lockstep and having the extra hour day at the end. If seasonal drift is a problem for people, right, as in people don't know what the seasons mean anymore, then I would say that time of day drift, which is the consequence of that alternate policy particularly, is even worse. And you didn't really respond to how bad that would be. So I'm just going to assume that I'll, for the purposes of this debate at least, we're going to be, given that my idea is definitely better than that one, I'll compare it with what I think is the way more closely contested idea, which is the 28-day regulation. To clarify my point about where would I get the months from, I wouldn't take them from different months each year. Maybe a good way to do it, now that I'm just trying to think of it, would be to take away from the first two 31-day months, right? That means that for the first half of the year, the months are mostly 30 days, and for the second half of the year, that's when the 31-day ones are or something. And that could be even. But the idea is it wouldn't be random, right? It would just happen once, and that would be the way things are from now on in, and people's phones would tell them about it. So then the next question about there are better ways. Obviously, I agree. This is a bit of a silly debate, and I'm also not going to my grave. But for the purposes of this debate, we have to assess the strengths and weaknesses of these two competing policies. The competing policy I'm proposing is that the main disadvantage of it is that the months are not regulated, in that they are, there are some 30 and some 31. I think that the reason which this weakness shouldn't really be taken that seriously, though, is that it is only two options. And I think people have really shown their ability under the modern day to deal with two options. It's February, which gets people tripped up. So I think that if people have shown to be able to deal with two options under the status quo, they could probably deal with two options under my day. And the strengths are obviously the contract stuff. His strengths are exactly the same in that you get the contracts and everything being regulated. He's got his added strength of that months now exactly are 4 weeks. Here's what I think the problems are with his policy, though, which make it not worth it. The first one is that you have to add an entire month, which I think represents a greater cultural shift and something which people will have a harder time acclimatizing to than simply reshuffling days. Because people already think the whole February 28 days thing is pretty dumb. So I get the impression that my policy would come as a relief to these people, whereas in him, he has to invent an entire new month name. And there aren't that many, aren't they based off gods or something? Anyway, I'd be interested to hear what the month name is, but maybe there'll be an added benefit of the name of the new month thing. It could be a short-term thing for his side. But I suppose the other question as well, though, is that what do you do with that day at the end? And I think one of the problems with saying, well, it's going to be a holiday, is that a lot of people, work through holidays, and a lot of businesses might take issue with the fact that they have to pay overtime, for example, every year.
Well, the new month would obviously be named Wiley or something like that. I'm going to name it after me, man, because this is my calendar that I'm inventing. The Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, the Wilian calendar. I want to also point out that, this is a silly debate, but obviously my opponent did make some good points about how we're going to compare who won in this round. He's using an issue of competing policies. I don't think I'm advocating my counter plan. In fact, I'm just using it as a test of your case. Honestly, the only reason that I'm proposing this counter proposal is as a test of whether or not extending 30 days of the month of February is a good idea. It's not necessarily something that I'm arguing for. It's just me pointing out the fact that there are better ways to solve the problem, and it's a true opportunity cost here, because if you implement his calendrical reform, you can't have any of the other options that are available, which is why I'm still going to let this one float out there about having the extra days or having the extra minutes tacked on at the end of the year. I don't think that the impacts that he's arguing for are any different here or any larger than they are with the current issue that we have with the calendar of seasonal drift. I mean, honestly, I guess we can just discard the whole seasonal drift thing unless we have a calendar that's exactly lined up with the solar year. But that's more complicated to teach people. So it's an issue of balancing what you'd rather do. Would you rather have an efficient calendar that actually has all of this stuff built into it and is more intuitive because the weeks divide into the months? I guess I have to keep hammering at that. But also, either way you slice it, he says that it's a big cultural shift. It's going to be a big cultural shift no matter what we do. People were up in arms when Pope Gregory reformed the calendar. In fact, it wasn't even adopted here in America until 1752. Many of our quote-unquote founding fathers had their lives reduced by 10 days in the middle of their lives because Pope Gregory decided that they were just going to skip 10 days. So it's going to be a cultural shift one way or the other. I think that it's going to be a minimal difference between the huge cultural shift of, say, having 13 months of 28 days, which is at least predictable, as opposed to still keeping it at 31 and 30 days. That's much less predictable and less understandable for people to get. I also want you to cross-apply my opponent's argument from his first speech, where he talked about how it would be easy to implement this stuff because of technology and the internet, and because all of these internet people can do whatever they want to. Everybody's plugged in nowadays, so I don't think they're going to raise a huge fit, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of flamers arguing about it on online forums, whether it was a good idea or not. Here you go, man.
So I guess the first thing we've agreed on now is that when it comes to the seasonal shift, that the costs of correcting for seasonal shift outweigh are worse than the costs of just having a leap year. So we can discard on the comparison the first idea of just having the perfect seasonal calendar. I think that the much better idea, which he's arguing for, is the regulated 13-month year, 28 day per month. The first thing I'd say here is that look, I know you're saying I'm not arguing for it, but like you are. There's no need to put the self-inflicted wound of, I don't really think this is a good idea. Like if you're saying it's an opportunity cost and you believe that, then you are advocating for the actual cost of that opportunity. So I guess the way up here is that it's evaluating because many of the benefits of his regulated calendar already exist under my idea, right? Because the difference between having an exact 28-day consistency and a most 30 and a couple of 31s, I think, is quite small. The big the only benefit he can claim, which is truly unique to that idea, is that every month will be 4 weeks. I don't think he's properly explained why it is that people get confused by weeks crossing over months. And whereas if you think about the things I've explained in terms of contracts and how 10% can be a meaningful financial distribution, and the way in which you can teach rhymes and things to help school kids, I think I've explained the benefits of mine better than he's explained the unique benefit of his. The second thing I point out is that then the next question is, now that we know that the benefits, I think I'm probably edging ahead, it's what are the costs of implementation? What I've suggested is that with the ease of technology, is that because of the change I'm proposing is quite small, which is that only 2 months get reduced and only 1 month goes to what everyone kind of feels it should be anyway, that is the sort of thing which technology can account for very easily because it's only a small shift. Whereas what he is proposing is actually quite radical. It's to reduce the days of every single month to 28, except for February, I suppose, and add an entire new month, which I suggest that the cost of implementing that will be much higher because, like a Wiley area, like I really do like the idea. It is going to be something which is going to be much harder to code into people's phones. It's going to be much harder to introduce to the vocabulary so that parents can speak the same language as their children. But also I point to his own analysis about how people were up in arms when Pope Gregory reformed the Gregorian calendar. What I would suggest is That doesn't show that people have an aversion to calendar reform. That shows that people have an aversion to radical calendar reform. Because Pope Gregory wasn't doing what I was doing, which is changing just a few things. Pope Gregory was changing a massive amount about the calendar, which is what his plan is. So I would suggest that what that point proves is that people will be easy in accepting of my idea, because it's a small intuitive shift people feel already should be the case anyway. Whereas his shift, whilst I agree there are a small amount of weeks regulating benefits, is radical and hard to.
All right. Well, I'm basically going to argue at this point in the debate, whether I'm advocating the counter plan or not, whether it's an opportunity cost or not. Yes, you are going to compare whether the pro should be implemented versus what I've suggested. Not the only options. Once again, I just want to point that out, that there are other options available. But as a sheer test of whether you want to vote for the in this debate, I want you to look at whether or not there are any individual complications to the pros case versus my advocacy or my non-advocacy of a 28-day month with 28-day month with 13 months per year, and with having that extra day point whatever as a holiday or whatever. These things, yes, they sound really they sound like they're a big change. I do want to point out that the calendrical reform of Pope Gregory the 13th was not a huge reform. He basically just changed the way that leap years operated. The number of days in the month stayed the same for every other day. It was just that before then they just stayed to a 4-year leap year cycle, as opposed to now we have exceptions for every 400 years and stuff like that. So it was a mild reform, but the fact that he had to take 10 days off the calendar points out the fact that over long periods of time, this makes stuff get out of sync. That's why we should prefer some sort of a plan or some sort of a calendar that allows us to easily divide the solar year into the calendar, and also that allows us to intuitively grasp the way the calendar works. Now, my opponent does bring up all sorts of problems that he says are unique to my counter plan, but the fact is that these are all artificially inflated distinctions. One way or the other, you're going to be changing the way that people plan their lives, the way that they see the way time operates. You are talking about a huge cultural shift here, but the difference between the pro and the con is insignificant as far as that's concerned. One way or the other, people are going to be up in arms about this. Like I said, they'll be flaming it on the internet for months afterwards, years to come. So, I want you to consider the pro versus the con simply in terms of what is more intuitively graspable and what is more to your liking as a flat, even calendar that makes sense over the course of a year. And all of the other supposed detriments to my counter plan, they just apply to the pro plan as well. People are going to be confused about what month of the first 2 months you take the extra day for the leap year and stuff like that. It still has problems with it that people can criticize for the exact same reasons they criticize the current calendar.
Okay, so I'll just go through each of the comparisons then. The first one is saying is that there are other options I haven't explained, and maybe they're better. Since he hasn't explained them, they're not relevant in the debate. The second one is what I've dubbed the cosmic precision model, which is the make it exactly 5 years. Sorry, my cat is chewing my ear off. Jesus Christ. So that one, I think that we've agreed that the cost of knocking out what the time of day means every year means that my model is better than that. The real winner, I think, he's got, if he's going to win, is going to be the regulated weeks one. So the first thing I point out is that when you're saying Pope Gregory knocked 10 days off the calendar, like that is comparatively more radical to what I'm doing, which is just reallocating 2 days only, right? And making one day, actually 1 month, even easier to understand, because now it's 30, like the months surrounding it. So what that suggests to me is that idea of yours is somewhat radical, and people will resist it accordingly. The other thing as well is that his one has it hasn't yet been explained what the benefit of regulated weeks is, where I have explained the benefits of making February quite intuitive. But also the last thing to consider is that his holiday day, we still don't know what's going on with that. Will businesses cooperate? It's still ambiguous.
This is a great debate. I'm glad that we had. Thank you very much to my opponent. I do want to I want to compliment him on how he's handled this debate, especially since it's so freaking crazy, this topic. I think that he does make good points as to why we should make calendar reform, but I'm going to illustrate the fact once again that if you're still leaving some months as 31 days and some as 30 days, then you've still got this weird unevenness in the calendar. That's the only benefit that I'm really claiming with the 28-day months. And the fact that the 7 days divide into them more evenly is simply the fact that it makes more mathematical sense. You don't have to do weird calculations to figure out how many months since you were born or whatever, or how many weeks. So, in the long run, maybe it's a radical reform, maybe it isn't. The reason Pope Gregory had to take the 10 days out is because it's stacked up over time. So I'm trying to avoid that with my counter plan. I don't want that shift to stack up over time and have to fix it in the future.